the 70s was quite an extreme decade, even the way people dressed with the very brightly coloured clothes and very platform shoes and really big baggy trousers.
It was still feasible to to sign on the dole and no be pressured into getting a job.
I do remember being in Glasgow and it felt like it was like an old Victorian city as a kid, because there were still cobbled stones and it was really dirty.
Violence was always kind of lurking somewhere nearby, whether it was at football matches or sort of youth clubs, discos.
It was also the time of gangs and sort of gangs with fashion.
I was into Bowie, as everyone else was.
T-Rex, progressing on to Bowie and Roxy music.
Sun Ra, the New York Dolls, Iggy Pop.
The Velvet Underground, Lou Reed, New York Dolls, MC5, kind of proto-punk band.
You know, when the American New York bands started coming through, it was probably just seemed like such an otherworldly thing compared to what had traditionally come out of Scotland.
My only sort of relations in terms of punk was the New Musical Express, and then before the records came, because it took a while before any records came out, but I started dressing up in like big furry goggles and stuff like that and just stoting about buying myself.
We used to sort of say we were glam punks because we'd all been into Bowie. We'd all been into Bowie and that sort of thing, and Eno. So there was this thing of almost provoking the weekend punks by, I remember, Rab and the Scars and Davy and the Fire Engines would sometimes put lipstick on and earrings and wear girls' clothes as a wind-up.
It was just really bright and it was really liberating, and I think that was the message most people took from punk was, get off your arse and do something, create something.
Elements of punk, as far as I'm concerned anyway, that were present in the early Scars were not so much to be like the other punk bands, it was to be ourselves.
Musically there wasn't really that much to punk. If anything, it was a kind of negative statement. It was more, punk music kind of, willfully simplistic music, wasn't it? It was as simple as possible. So it was more a kind of erasure, I think, of all the excesses of progressive rock.
I think one thing differentiated Edinburgh amongst other sort of punk movements in the country was the fact that people wanted to move on from punk really quickly and make their own original music, and punk was a starting point, but it wasn't supposed to be, perfecting a formula. It gave us an opportunity to play and get audiences, but the main thing was to move out and put your own original sound out there.
Well, we wanted to be punk, but also we wanted to move away from what punk was, in the sense that we wanted to have our own identity.
In the late 70s, obviously, there was a tremendous kind of flowering of Edinburgh bands and a lot of excitement, and it seemed that at the lower level of a kind of club level, there wasn't enough gigs for people to play. So in what seemed a completely mad move, I decided to set up a small live event on a Tuesday night. Why Tuesday night, I don't know, but a place called the Aquarius in Grindlay Street in Edinburgh. And it took maybe a couple hundred people at the most.
I mean, Alan came from that kind of pre-punk Stockbridge sort of rock and roll scene.
And in a funny way, I was kind of like an in-betweenie, because I was maybe slightly older than a lot of the musicians, and I could remember back to, well, particular things like MC5 and the Stooges, and I wasn't quite a paid-up member of the Sex Pistols fan club, because I kind of felt they were just like doing what the Stooges had done better.
About the same time, before we started the label, I had thought, I'd seen the Slits, and like a lot of other girls thought, right, we can do this too. I got a guitar, and actually, and I'd met people like Rab and the Scars and Davy, and they encouraged me for my birthday. They bought me a very good guitar and said, you've got to do this. Russell was the original drummer, Russell from Fire Engines, Dirty Reds.
The Dirty Reds Mark II, and the real Dirty Reds, got together with myself on vocals and Russell on drums and Davy Henderson on guitar and Graham Main on bass.
One day I was in Hot Licks, that was a music store in Coburn Street that sold punk records. I was looking at the ads for band members, and I saw an advert by a band called The Scars. They were looking for a singer.
And we knew that we wanted a real frontman who was going to perform, and so we only got 1 or 2 replies actually, and invited both of them for an audition.
And it was up to me to do the first audition, so I put my heart and soul into the audition.
And the second guy was so shocked and awed, he declined the opportunity.
Just jumped up and down, and I think I was probably screaming more than singing.
And he kind of curled up in a ball, crouched down on the floor in this garage, and then exploded up into the air and started shrieking. It was the most incredible thing I've ever seen.
By that time, we had responded to an advert in Hot Licks again that was set there by Hillary.
A girl singer appeared to be advertising for like-minded musicians, and I just thought this is a really well-designed postcard, and it turned out to have been designed by Bob Last.
She was looking for talent that was different, so we responded to that. She came along to the gig and took some photographs of us.
And we met Bob shortly afterwards, and then he started putting out records on the Fast label.
I mean, Fast product was first off the blocks and really started making a fairly big impression from the word go. I mean, the Mekons was a single of the week in the NME, so that was really amazing.
He put out the Fast product compilations, Earcom early on, which were the first ever recordings by Joy Division.
I think we were a little different from other labels in that we were driven by all this fantastic stuff we found that other people were doing, but we were using the label to say things. We were communicating by the label, if you know what I mean.
We really were inundated after the first 3 or 4 singles. Absolutely inundated with tapes.
He also gave Edinburgh's musicians a feeling that they were connected to a greater outside musical world. You know, that he was a mover and shaker, and you know, maybe if you got your head down and worked at it, you could do some interesting things musically in the way that he had.
He was very good at getting you to do things that would benefit you and help you, you know, like as an artist or as a person. He was very driven. He knew exactly what he wanted for Fast product.
I was quite impressed by his sort of canny business sense, I suppose, as I saw it at the time.
It was all done really well. It was always, you always quoted in the right ways. Great sleeves, great records, you know, great press. It was cool.
It was one of the coolest independent labels in Britain. In fact, if not the coolest, because at that time factory records didn't exist.
He was doing all these things with posters and artwork about consumerism and we're all consumers. The kind of stuff that's absolutely accepted nowadays and isn't even thought twice about, but then seemed quite unusual.
Any packaging, because people knew we were into packaging, so sometimes people would put together their own concept of packaging, and we got some very interesting stuff.
There was a kind of excitement around it, you know, that we weren't just making music, we were also making visual art and expressional statements.
We used to go around to Bob's place a lot, myself and the other guys in the Scars, and then also the David Henderson from the Fire Engines was around there a lot as well, and Russell and the band that turned into the Flowers.
There was a pub on Coburn Street called the Wig and Pen, and for some reason just punks had started kind of hanging out there and drinking, and then bands just started playing. There wasn't a stage, it was just like quite a small pub.
It was quite a fertile time. Everyone was involved in trying to do things. Alan promoted a lot of amazing gigs in Edinburgh, a place called JJ's, which is in Valentino's.
Which was the club where all the bands used to meet. And it was like, bands was at the bottom, and obviously it was this kind of rooftop club. And that was the club that I used to go to Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
A lot of interaction with all the bands, and it was very creative, very supportive of young people trying to do silly things.
Music was great in Edinburgh for a while, being made by the local bands when the Associates were playing around Edinburgh, and you know, some of the best gigs I've ever seen were the Associates and the Scars and the Fire Engines. It was very exciting.
I think it was just a the pure fun of it all, and the fact that it was so easy to make music that people seemed to like, and there was a desire for it, so there was gigs available and you could play, and it wasn't necessarily about making money or anything. It was kind of like a hobby, but a pretty good hobby, I thought.
Being a wee laddie from the, from the rural Lanarkshire, it totally blew our minds to come through and see the Scars.
We'd always looked at the Scars as being sort of ahead of us. The Scars were quite an influence on us. They were, the band's kind of playing in 1978. I mean, we were still playing cover versions and TV art, whereas the Scars had a whole set of their own songs, and they were good songs.
It's fantastic that Paul Haig and the Fire Engines sort of remember, have such fond memories of those days, because I really do as well. I remember we played our second gig was with a band called TV Art, who then subsequently changed their name to Joseph K. And we just thought they were a great band. And with the Fire Engines as well, obviously it was the Dirty Reds at the time, but they're our mates.
All of the members of Joseph K, we all went to the same high school. We were all at Firhill High School in South Edinburgh. By the time I met Paul Haig, he would have left school. Paul and Ronnie left after fourth year when they were 16, while Davey and I stayed on to do hires. And that would have been TV Art starting.
The first time I saw Joseph K, which I think they were probably still called TV Art then, they were playing a small place called the Netherbow Theatre that was seated but only took about 80 people. And in the classic way, four guys came out with, I think predictably it was dark suits, but played with an incredible intensity. I
was at drama college by this time as well then, like I said, and I think secretly I knew that Davy Henderson was going to be a much better fucking singer than I would be, and write better songs than that. So I pulled out. It was all amicable.
One day in the Virgin Records shop, which I used to go to sometimes after school uptown, Davy and Angus actually said to me, "Do you want to come round to the flat this weekend? We've got a proposition to put to you." And then when I went round, he said, "We're forming a band. Tam's leaving to become an actor. We want us to do something new, and we want you to be in it." So we kind of went for there.
And they became the Fire Engines.
The Fire Engines, I think, were one of the most inspiring bands I've seen, and I think still are. I think Davy Henderson, the main guy in the Fire Engines, is a star, even though he maybe hasn't found his audience yet.
Once we played our gig at the art college, and right after Paul Steen came along and said, "I want to make a single, I've got the money." Bob Lass came on the scene very quickly after that single was released. It could even before it was released, but I think through connections with David. David was in a band called the Flowers.
I remember being at the top of Hurston, and these four guys came in to the tap, and they all had these big long coats on. They looked like a band should look like. They all walked in together. They looked like a fucking band. They all had long coats on. They looked like, that was it. They were going to take on the fucking world.
There had been a news story in one of the Glasgow tabloids about, somebody sniffing glue and thinking they could fly and jumping off a house or something. Well, for whatever reason, Glasgow City Council banned punk, which just seemed fairly crazy. So, as a consequence, a lot of bands for a period of time were having to play in places like Paisley.
And you were like, I loved Oranges. They were great. I mean, they were really great. They were the cool Glasgow art band.
I mean, Joseph K were modernist in outlook. We wanted to be moving forward. We didn't want to be repeating music from the past. I think it was a major difference between us and Orange Juice. Orange Juice, looked back. Orange Juice, I think, were trying to... If you asked Edwin what bands he wanted to be like, he would have probably said the Byrds, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Buffalo Springfield, bands like this. Alan Horn was just a kind of larger-than-life character that used to sort of hang around with Orange Juice.
I think Alan's was a really creative person, and he certainly was probably he was the character that really seemed to drive the whole thing forward.
Alan loved the Velvets. I mean, there was always this thing about the Velvet Underground, sort of huge shadow over the music I was involved with at that time, you know. So yeah, I think Alan did like to think he was a bit of a Warhol, and he had Orange Juice as the Velvet Underground.
He's got Warhol spectacles, the blonde hair. There's the famous picture in the Velvet Underground album cover of Warhol holding the tambourine and looking through it. There's a picture somewhere in the archive of Alan doing that. And yeah, and also Warhol kind of very much is emblematic of that, the pop moment, in, either in pop music or pop art or whatever. And that's something I think Alan has aspired to. Alan always wanted to sign the Fire Engines, and I think was absolutely galled that Bob Last signed them to Fast Product or Pop Oral, whatever they were called at the time. And as to the bigger fish in the pond, I think both Bob Last and Alan viewed each other very, very warily and circled each other and avoided contact. But Alan would have loved to have had the Fire Engines on his label.
Alan Horn used to say, you should really sign for Postcard to us, but that would be in a kind of social situation in a pub, maybe at an Orange Juice gig or something, and it would just be what a person like that would do, just on the off chance that you might say yes. But I never really regarded any of it as serious, and we were happy enough where we were.
I found him very condescending and dismissive of musicians, right? It's that kind of attitude. It was not musicians that do all the great things. It's the people behind the scenes who manipulate musicians, like him, like Warhol. I don't know. Even though we were kind of, our parents came from Glasgow, there was definitely a sense of it not being part of Glasgow. Even though you go into Glasgow to see bands, no bands would come to Scilbride, or if they did, no one would go and see them. But it was, but it shaped the music, I would say. The first time I met Roddy was at the local youth centre, the Key Youth Centre, into just this little David Bowie lookalike, little guy with plastic sandals on, spiky hair, and I had the guitar and I was playing the guitar. I said, "This is White Riot by the Clash, you know, can you do this?" I'm showing him how to play it, sort of thing. He's like, "Yeah." Gave the guitar to him, and as soon as he played, it was my jaw hit the deck, you know. I was like, "Geez, oh, this lad's going to be a star," you know, because he was amazing.
My memory of Roddy Frame as a 16-year-old are slightly vague, but charming, quiet, looking a bit cowboyish with a red neckerchief, but supremely talented.
We were aware of Orange Juice with, I think just Blue Boy had just come out, I believe, and of that, it's a great record. So, and Roddy really loved Orange Juice. He recognised a kindred spirit even from the record straight away with Edwin.
And you were like...
There was definitely a big difference between the sort of bands that emerged in Glasgow and the ones that emerged in Edinburgh. I don't know with Glasgow how much they tied in with the art college, but the art school in Edinburgh, that was a big part of us.
I think as a guitarist, the Edinburgh groups really blew me away, because Paul Research from the Scars, you know, the Fire Engines, and Malcolm and Paul Haig from Joseph K. I just thought the guitars were incredible. They were so trebly, you know.
It's interesting, there are a number of Edinburgh bands of that period do seem to have that kind of New York spiky, no-wave guitar sound. I'm not quite sure why that is. My only theory would be that the musicians knew each other. Joseph K and the Fire Engines palled around together, played together, occasionally lent each other guitars, and when you're listening to the same stuff and you're on the same wavelength, then it comes out. That's my only theory.
We sort of had a lot of affinity for the start with New York. It was the Velvets, and then on with sort of James White and the Blacks, and that, you know, and that Lydia Lunch, and that sort of music was what we related to.
Edinburgh bands very often had better ideas, more lateral thinking, were interesting musically, but couldn't get it together on a business level to get signed and promote themselves. Unkindly maybe, but in the West Coast you got the impression there was less musical talent, but a real driving urge to make the best of that and get signed and be commercially successful. I don't know what that says about the two cities, but there was a kind of a difference between the bands that they produced. I think Glasgow became the centre of the music business in Scotland because I think the infrastructure was there. There's probably more studios, there was a lot of very smart managers who could do deals, and I think once 2 or 3 acts indicated some commercial potential, it became a standing joke. There was A&R men on the plane every weekend, you know, an all expenses paid trip to Glasgow, apparently to sign a new act. I think when Alan Horn signed Joseph Kay, he was always, I think, slightly ambiguous about them, and I think this is something that probably Paul Haig feels as well. He was probably closer to Malcolm and not so close to Paul. And he liked that idea, the symmetry of a West Coast and an East Coast band. And sometimes he liked Joseph Kay and sometimes he didn't.
Postcard, slowly but surely, I think, probably usurped Fast Product in terms of media attention. I think Alan Horn was really very clever at manipulating the press and did a great job.
All through Postcard Records, Edinburgh got nothing but good press. You know, every, like I said, Orange Juice were complete press darlings. Flavour of the month.
When Joseph Kay and Orange Juice released their 2 singles at the same time, there did seem to be a genuine upsurge of interest in Postcard. And it was an era in which, particularly things like the News Express or the NME, if they paid attention to you, then it really made a difference.
I think the sound of Young Scotland was largely Alan Horn's clever marketing by him, and probably the media picked up on that as being the phrase that they used to describe that movement and these bands from that period in time. I think the sound of Young Scotland almost always means Orange Juice, Joseph Kay, Fire Engines, maybe Aztec Camera.
Possibly that's one of those phrases that's not really tied to any time. I know that when it was first coined, possibly it was coined around about 1981, 82, talking about bands like ourselves, but I think the sound of any young country should always be changing.
Fire Engines really weren't affiliated with Postcard. For some reason they got associated with them by the press. They were more in the... Although Joseph Kay became associated with Postcard as well. And I think that was more a record label thing rather than a scene thing. So there was a bit of confusion there. You know, because Joseph Kay and Fire Engines, they were part of the Edinburgh scene, very much so, and a vibrant part of it. But the sound of Young Scotland, I think, is a happy enough term to allow to be spread over the whole of Scotland, because we were all young and we were the sound of Young Scotland. It was quite an accurate assessment.
I think we did play a significant role in putting a new generation of Scotland and creating this idea that there were exciting scenes in Scotland. You know, I think even the Postcard guys would admit that the sense that you could have this exciting scene and that it could be outward looking, I think we did play a big part in that.
If Joseph Kay were going through Glasgow or TV Art in the early days to play with Orange Juice, they would be like the headliner, we would be the support, and it would be the same in Edinburgh. Alan lost a certain confidence. He started to kind of doubt himself and doubt the bands. Joseph Kay, we split up, I think, just because we'd been in each other's pockets for 2 years, you know, rehearsing, recording, did a lot of gigging. And Orange Juice had now signed to Polydor Records and had recorded their first album. So Edmund said, well, why don't you join Orange Juice?
Probably with Joseph Kay splitting up and Orange Juice moving to a major label, Alan Horn seemed to lose interest in the label, I think. He probably, he had Aztec Camera still at that point, and you could see they were destined to sort of start breaking big. But I don't think Alan was interested in, necessarily being successful just for the sake of it. I think he just lost interest, and at that stage, Aztec Camera and the Jazzateers signed to Rough Trade.
When Postcard finished, Orange Juice was still there, making fantastic music. Aztec Camera was still there, making fantastic music. Paul Haig was still there, making great music. it did carry on, but it has to carry on in a different kind of way.
Russell phoned me in on, I think it was New Year's Day, 1982, was it? Possibly 83, I think it was 82. See, I don't even know when we finished, it's that long ago. And said, that's it, it's finished, Davy's left the band, we're over, and that was that.
After we recorded the album, we went on tour again. We'd been touring pretty continually for a couple of years. And by this time we were really fed up living in each other's pockets. So the band started to fragment.
Well, I went one way and they went another way. Signed a solo deal with Charisma.
And we carried on for another year with me singing and with a variety of other musicians in tow. And so, I mean, it continued for a year, and then I kind of lost a bit of faith in it and thought, okay, we should really stop calling ourselves the Scars now.
I think when we left Postcard, we would have preferred to go into a major there and then, but our trade came along. And the reason behind that is, as a major label has more muscle, or did have, and they have, they can expose you to a bigger audience, a wider audience. They can break you in the States, all this kind of stuff, and that was the reason we would get bigger and better through a major label.
I think, in fairness, I think when Aztec Camera and Orange Juice got signed to major record labels, it was the best thing for them. You have to, they wanted better studios, they wanted better promotion. I know that's not very exciting or creative, but they need that, and you need to go on to the next stage. If you're being uncharitable, the influence of Postcard can be seen in countless Glasgow bands that took it and made it very commercially successful and made a lot of money off it. But that's often the way. You know, the pioneers are never quite rewarded financially.
Then I started a band with a couple of members of ex-Emergence.
And that was the kind of birth of when I'd gone up to Davey and said, you want to do a try, you got up to do that, try. And Russell, we got Russell, and Russell being in the Phalanges was part of that thing.
But Win, I think, were one of the kind of wrongly kind of forgotten acts now. Again, they're a bit too far ahead of their time, but lots of great ideas. When you look at the story of Swamplands, it really, you can trace it from the logo and Postcard, which is a little pussycat banging a drum, I think it is. On Swamplands, it's become a big cat. And I think Alan inevitably realised that you had to grow up a bit and get muscle and do a deal with the devil, which in this case was London Records, if he was going to get some kind of success. Because success still is the name of the game, particularly for Alan. You know, you can't, it's all very well having some critically raved over independent singles, but you know, people wanted to get in the top 10. And I think that was the next step for Alan. And Alan could charm people, and I think it was a guy called Roger Ames who was in charge of London, and Alan got his own label to play with.